Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to what I think will be quite a stimulating program organized by the Middle East Institute here at the National University of Singapore. And it is my happy duty as director of the Institute to introduce Professor Oren Yiftachel, whom I have had the pleasure of meeting and working with previously, and whose work embraces a number of really exciting intellectual issues and problematics. Professor Yiftachel is a geographer who's done important work in urban studies. He is also working, as I gather from his very extensive resume and list of publications, in the field of ethnopolitics. And here in Singapore, certainly, which is a multi-ethnic political system and society, I think we would have a particular interest in what I think he's going to talk about this afternoon in a lecture entitled "A New Political Geography for Israel, Palestine, ? From Colonial Control to Confederation." So I'm a political scientist whose subfield is comparative politics, so I have a special interest in ethno-sectarian politics and the politics of divided societies. So I'm particularly interested in hearing what our guest speaker has to say. He's a very distinguished academician. He's at the Ben Gurion University in Israel, and he has published very widely in the fields that I just described. He edits an important journal. He has supervised many PhD students. He's on the editorial boards of important academic publications. And at the same time, he is an activist. He's very much concerned with civil society and human rights movements in Israel and Palestine and in other places. So I think that we're in for a most interesting afternoon, and I will, without further elaboration, although there is much more I think that could be said about our guest, I will ask him to come forward and speak, and we will follow the usual procedure that we follow at MEI gatherings such as this. There will be an opportunity for dialogue with Professor Yiftachel when he finishes, and we look forward very much to what you have to say. So, ahlan wa sahlan to Singapore.
Shalom to all, marhaba. It's a pleasure being here. I thank the Institute very much for inviting me. It's an ongoing conversation, discussion that us scholars around the world have, and quite often our theories, our analysis focus on particular places, and yet we have enough commonalities, enough ideas to share these discussions about this one world, one global arena where we exist. Israel-Palestine, of course, is famously defined by Borges, the author, the Argentinian author, as the place of all places. So it focuses on it. So many processes, concepts, tensions, histories, memories, and my lecture will touch on a lot of them. But yet I want you to consider Israel-Palestine not as an exception, as is often portrayed by scholars and by the media, but as an intensive place where indeed maybe a hyper example of processes that happen elsewhere, not the least Singapore. And when we think about the history of Malaysia, Singapore, the separation, partition, secession, whatever you want to call it, the ethnic relations and tension. Malaysia, for example, was part of some of my previous studies on ethnocratic societies. And I'll elaborate a little bit on it today. And Singapore, I don't know enough about, but definitely it is in this dynamic of space, identity, control, and also recent immigration, recent labor immigration, which adds another component to the already complex society. So let us start with Benjamin Netanyahu's quote from about 3 years ago. We've managed to create a national agreement about the concept of two states for two peoples as our strategy for peace. And this followed his Bar-Ilan famous speech, where for the first time, much to the surprise of a lot of people, he agreed to the concept of a two-state solution. As you know, the Likud governing coalition and the Likud governing party is officially in its platform declares that there will be no second state between the Jordan and the sea. So this was a surprise move, a leadership move by Netanyahu, and created, while there was skepticism about it, it created some hopes, very much in the fashion that Ariel Sharon, the previous prime minister, well, two before him, has made a shift, and people thought that could follow. But 3 years later, the skeptics appear to have been right. Despite that statement, despite the Bar-Ilan speech, and despite great willingness of the Palestinian Authority, not the Hamas, which we'll talk about in a minute, but the major recognized political leadership of the Palestinians, including, of course, the attempt at the UN last year and this year, there is no Palestinian state, right? And against this statement, we could ask, why hasn't it progressed, a two-state solution? Why has Israel added about 50,000 settlers since that speech? Right? This is a very massive amount, already amounting to more than 550,000 Jews that actually live beyond the Green Line. This is the West Bank and East Jerusalem. According to international law, they're all settlers. According to Israeli law, only the ones on the West Bank are settlers. And also, and this is something that I'll focus about, why has Israel continued to nationalize Arab land? To nationalize, that is to bring it under Jewish control. So there is a disjuncture, there is a tension, there is an enigma here. Why has the talk been for peace? And Netanyahu last week in the UN also talked about peace very strongly. And the actions are in a different direction. And I think there is, of course, an interesting academic topic here. There is also a point as an Israeli, pro-peace Israeli, I'm very interested in the progress towards peace. And this is part of my research, of course, which has to stand up to all the academic standards, of course, but is driven by the passion and the will to reach peace for the future of the region and my country. So now we press the right. So the lecture is titled, A New Political Geography for Israel-Palestine, ? You're right. From Colonial Rule to Confederation. I want to give a few statements about political geography and legal geography, which is one of my hats, to look at the critical analysis of the geopolitics, especially focusing on land, to look at some key concepts like ethnocracy and gray space, to interrogate future scenarios, and to look at the possibility of creating a new vision, perhaps a new horizon, which falls between the two states and the one-state solution, which I'll elaborate on. And this is a confederation between Israel and Palestine. It's quite hard to see. I thought I'd have a screen here, but I don't. Is this mobile? No, it's not mobile. Anyhow, we'll try and... what is political geography? What is legal geography? It's quite important just to give you a taste. I know this is not a university setting, but nonetheless, it's a scholarly institute, right? So political geography actually investigates the dynamic links between power and space. Hence, it is a key to understanding territorial conflicts, which of course are rife around the world. And because territory is a main claim to power in the world, this kind of research, this type of research into the history, this in the making, into all these elements, the land system, sovereignty, borders, settlement, minority rights, diasporas, globalization, all these processes which are created, constructed, and mediated by space, political geography actually helps us understand very much. It actually peels off some of the surface expression and looks at a long-term dynamic and therefore helps us to understand, for example, why Netanyahu's statement about the two-state solution have not materialized. Political geography and legal geography also help fathom the link between identity and power, which is a critical aspect, quite often neglected in some of the more sort of Machiavellian analysis of international politics about rational actors. There are strong identity issues that influence players very much. And as I said, political geography helps us see the structural dynamics. So for example, in Israel-Palestine, the common narrative that it is two nations vying or have a territorial conflict between them. And this is definitely partially true. But another narrative that is much less told is that there is a dynamic between a settler society, there is a colonization process, continuous colonization process, which continuously expands Jewish control, and while the Palestinian control retracts and retracts. And that's very important, very structural dynamic that we've seen all around the world, settler societies. So political geography actually reveals that, exposes that, and sees the strength of it and also the way it functions as an obstacle to much of our attempt to progress towards peace. So my main point is that big part of the political geography of Israel-Palestine is actually shaped by the land system. So here the political geography and the legal geography are exposed below the surface of the media, of the electoral politics, of the violence. There is actually a subterranean process where the land system actually shapes much of the outcome, and this is borne out of my research. The political geography of Israel-Palestine has progressed in 5 phases, about which I'll elaborate in a minute. But one of the main points is that since the mid-90s, some might put it, my colleague Lev Greenberg, for example, puts it with the assassination of Rabin, who was the Prime Minister of Israel in 1995, but it's thereabouts. It doesn't have to be one particular moment. But since then, there is a new phase of political geography, which I call it oppressive consolidation, which is Jewish expansion more or less seized. The Zionist colonial settlement no longer continues to expand. The opposite. Israel starts to retract. It retreated from Lebanon. It retreated from Gaza. And I'm talking about the territory of Israel-Palestine. It retreated from the Palestinian cities. But this is not coupled with genuine reconciliation. This is not coupled with redistribution. This is not coupled with an attempt to give the Palestinians an equal status. So it's a readjustment or consolidation without reconciliation. And that actually creates a process of radicalization on both sides, right? Because there are different narratives. There is a narrative of